everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm here with you today for part 3 of my Vogue 1643 Sew Along. So today we are putting pockets on, attaching the trim, and I actually went ahead and put the buttons on my pockets because I've put the buttons to close those pockets. I like the way it hangs better. And then inserting sleeves both into the lining and the body of the jacket. Hold on, Gidget. And then putting in our sleeve heads and our shoulder pads. Now again, the jacket is not looking like much. It looks like a jacket, but it looks like a very crumpled mess jacket, and that's okay. If you feel like your jacket looks like a crumpled mess, excuse her, that's perfectly normal. It's just gonna get more crumpled as we're turning things inside out and right side out. So don't worry about that until the final press. All right, if you have any questions, leave those down below. I've changed up the angle of filming a little bit, so hopefully that works a little better. Let me know in the comments below. We're still figuring all this out. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Bye. Okay, we're trying a different camera angle today. Again, I'm still playing around with all this, so bear with me. It's definitely been a learning curve. Okay, so my Petersham ribbon came in the mail, and I have two colors. I have this dark red, and actually the pattern calls for 3.5 yards of the Petersham, and she only had 3 meters of the navy blue. So I don't know why I didn't just order 3 meters of the red as well. I went ahead and ordered 4 of the red. Anyway, I'm gonna have leftover red Petersham. But what the pattern wants you to do is it wants you to stack your 1-inch wide ribbon on top of your 1.5-inch wide ribbon. So what I'm gonna do, because this is gonna get placed on the pockets and also along the whole front of the jacket, is I'm just gonna make one continuous length, which will basically be just 3 meters. I'm really hoping I can make the 3 meters work too. Hopefully, because of the length that I took out of the front of the jacket, it's gonna be fine. Don't do as I do, do as I say, not as I do. So I'm just gonna go and I'm just gonna kind of line this up, and I'm gonna sew a line of stitching in navy thread on either side, like an edge stitch almost, on either side of the navy ribbon, attaching it to the red ribbon. And then when we're attaching it to the jacket, we'll use red thread because we'll be sewing along the edge of the red. So really quickly, I'm literally just gonna be sewing the 1-inch or the 1-inch Petersham to the 1.5-inch red and centering it as I go. If you wanted to, you could put like a Wonder tape or some kind of a double stick tape on the back of this and glue it by ironing it to this ribbon just to keep it in place. But for this particular application, I'm just gonna kind of do it by eye as I go. So I'm gonna do that real quick. I'm just gonna let all this ribbon fall down below, and off we go. Again, 3 meters worth, so that's quite a bit. And it was a UK seller, which is why it was in meters and not yards. Okay, so there we've got, this is my extra. We've got basically trim ready to go. So yeah, if you pick the same color, you don't, I mean, it's pretty uniform all the way down, but if you pick a very similar color and thread, you don't have to be as perfect with your application. So now this will just be used as one piece of trim, even though it is 2 pieces of ribbon put together. So now we can go ahead and do our pockets, and we will apply this as we're doing our pockets, and then we will also we'll probably get our pockets to a place where we can apply this, and then we will attach the trim to the pockets and to the front of the coat, just so I don't have to change thread 100 million times. And then we will finish the pockets, because you have to apply the trim before you can actually finish the pockets. So that's what we'll do next. Okay, now we're backtracking a little bit in our instructions. So we already have our lining body and our coat body put together. Sleeves are not yet in. We have the sleeves constructed, but they're not yet in, and that's fine. We'll get there because we don't have our side seams actually done on our main jacket yet, because we haven't done our trim. So now we're gonna go back to number 3 on our instructions, which we're gonna be working on the pockets. And the small breast pocket is worked the same way as the 2 larger hip pockets. So we've got 3 pockets that we're making. So first things first, we're going to stitch our, so I've got all of my pockets here with their lining. We're going to stitch our pocket band, which is the rectangle, to the top of our pocket, and that gets stitched at 5/8 of an inch. So we are going to stitch that, and then we're going to, hold on, I thought I had some notches. I needed to reclip some of my notches, I think. We're gonna sew these at 5/8 of an inch right here, and then on all 3 of the pockets, and then we're going to press that seam open. All right, so all 3 of our pockets have the pocket band sewn right sides together to the top of the pocket. Notice that I sewed with the interfaced pocket band on top. It'll make your life much easier because those feed dogs can do all the work for you. So I'm just gonna go and press this seam open on all 3 of these pieces real quick. I'll be right back. Okay, so now I have, and if you can kind of see, hopefully you can see that okay, the pocket band, so we've got a really tall pocket right now. So now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna switch over to my red thread, and we're going to attach our trim, and we're literally going to center it over the seam that we just created. So I'm not gonna cut any of this. I'm gonna sew it all and then cut it as need be, because again, I don't wanna run out. I feel like I might be a little short. So I'm just going to very carefully center it. And again, you could use double stick tape if you wanted, but I'm going to center this trim right over that seam that I just created on all 3 pockets. And then we will come back and we're going to center this over the seam from the jacket front to the jacket band. So I'll be right back and we'll do that. All right, so now we're going to do what I just said we were going to do. Sorry, I am filming this on a Sunday and my family is home, so I want to apologize for any noise that there might be, number one. No matter how many times, it's not ideal that I'm filming on a Sunday. I will say that, but with the holiday coming up, I just really wanted to get this done. And my Petersham ribbon just finally arrived yesterday. And now that it's here and I'm seeing it with the fabric and the lining, guys, I'm so excited about this jacket. I can hardly stand it. I mean, if it's not done before we leave for Thanksgiving, that's fine. I don't need it to be because, again, you're seeing, you know, these videos weeks out. So I can actually wait to finish some of these videos because I'll still be on schedule. But anyway, sorry for the noise if you hear anything or if anyone comes barging in. Okay, so we're gonna just center this again over the seam allowance between the pocket and the pocket band. And I'm just sewing right on the edge of my red ribbon, which is my 1.5 inch ribbon. Got a very long tail. And I'm gonna sew it down on either side. And I find if you start at the top on both, so instead of like sewing down and then turning it and sewing it back, you'll get some rippling that way sometimes. So I like to start, you know, at the top, go down, and then start at the top again and go down. I mean, just make whichever way you want the top to be. I find that it just doesn't warp as easily that way. So that's what it looks like at this point. Now eventually the lining is gonna get sewn to the top and then this will all go back, and so the pocket will look like, kind of like that when all is said and done. And then we'll have a big pretty button right there in the middle. In fact, let's go get it. Let's take a look. This is the fun thing about sew-alongs. It's like I'm in my sewing room here with you guys. So then I'll have this big pretty button right there. Is that kind of hard to see? Probably. The big pretty button right there in the center. I'm very excited about this jacket. It's coming together, coming along nicely. Okay, I'm going to attach trim to my other two bigger pocket pieces, and then I'll come back and we can attach it to the front of the jacket. All right, so I've got all three pockets trimmed. My seam allowances are pressed open still on the back. Yep. We're still good. And now I'm going to do the front of my jacket, and then we'll come back to finish our pockets in a minute. Okay, so we have the front of the jacket, and again, our shoulder seams are done, and we have the band attached, but the side seams have not been done. That makes attaching this trim much easier. So I kind of have a weird vest that's not attached to the side seams yet. So basically, again, if you wanted to put a wonder tape or anything like that underneath your trim and then glue it, basically iron it on, you can definitely do that. And actually, you know, when we get up here and we've got these curved edges, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sew one edge down, and then I'm gonna go to my ironing board and press it, because I want, again, this Petersham has these little scallops almost at the top. So when you press it with steam, it allows it to bend. You can form it with bending. You know, it'll curve for you is what I'm trying to say. Kind of like bias tape, not as forgivable as bias tape, but it definitely will form a curve with a lot of steam. So I'm going to sew just one side down, and then we're gonna go to the ironing board and kind of mold it a little bit to that curved seam, especially around the back neck. And then we will come back and go from there. I also think I'm gonna measure my ribbon real quick, because I may not go all the way down to the base of the hem, just because I may be short on ribbon. Because again, she only had 3 meters of, I'm just gonna do a quick test here, 3 meters of the navy instead of 3.5, I mean, I needed 3.5 yards. I have 3 meters, so I'm a few inches short. If you're going back and forth between imperial and metric there. So just going to make sure that we have enough here. People, I think we're golden. Yes, with a little bit of extra. Yay, I was hoping that'd be the case. I was hoping that a lot of times they overstate the amount of fabric and stuff that you'll need just to be on the safe side. You know, if you have any mess ups, that kind of thing. Okay. So I'm just gonna go and I'm just going to center this. Again, you can totally glue this down if that makes you feel better, or you can pin it if you'd like to do that. But I'm just going to be molding this kind of with my hands as I go along. It doesn't really matter which way you wanna do it, but trying to keep this centered. And I'm just gonna do one side, and I'm just gonna pick a side. So I think I'm just gonna do the side that's on the band, not the side that's on the jacket. And then we will go and press and mold before we sew our second side down, because that's where the bubbling will come. All right, guys, if you're making a size 14 and you have to take all of the petite lines out, shortening basically the body by 2 inches, all the way around. You can get away with 3 meters of ribbon and have this much left over. I mean, this is nice insurance just to make sure you don't mess anything up, but there we go. I was kind of sweating that a little bit. All right, so I want to show you what this looks like. So I've sewn one edge down, but I just want you to notice, so it gets really, really ripply. You know, if I just tried to see how it's really ripply, this is the unsewn edge, because I have kind of stretched it a little bit as I've gone around curves, or kind of, you know, as I've gone around the neck curve here, kind of smooshed it in a little bit. So I need to stretch this outer layer where I've done the inside curves and kind of smoosh in where the inside curves. So it's a lot like doing bias tape. So I'm just gonna go to the iron, and I'm just gonna carefully press that, and I will take you with me and kind of show you what I'm gonna do before I sew the other side down. And again, you could definitely use pins, and I actually may use pins on the other side just so it's as perfect as can be. All right, let's go to the ironing board. Okay, so as you can see, this is a very straight part of the jacket. So this is the bottom part. So we're just gonna steam that and see how much better. I mean, again, this was straight, so that's not a surprise. But, and definitely, just press that. Look how much better that looks, and it just lies a lot flatter. And I could put pins in here. It's this side that's not been sewn. I could put pins in here if I wanted to. But then we're gonna come up. Let me scoot this down to areas. So this is the part in the front of the jacket where it starts to curve. So see, we got all this rippling right here. I'm actually gonna pull out my ham, but we're gonna be coaxing the ribbon to behave as it should in this area. Sorry, I do that all the time. I don't mean to fog up the lens. So, you'll notice, because of the nature of, sorry about the lens, it's like wearing glasses, because of the nature of the ribbon, and this may have some poly in it, I was almost positive I bought rayon, but it doesn't feel completely like it's rayon. My stuff that I've got here at home is cotton rayon. I need to look at the content. But you can see that it just lies a lot flatter just from a little bit of steam. So I'm going to do that because you'll notice, I mean, especially like here on the back, this is the neck where it's really curvy. I mean, look at that. We're going to have to stretch it to lie flat because it's even wanting to like flip up there. So I'm really going to have to stretch this outside edge here, and I'm just going to kind of pull it as I'm steaming it, which I have to have 2 hands to do, just to get that all nice and soft. But you're going to, I mean, that's fine. If it's really bubbly like that's what it's going to look like. But I'm going to just go all the way around and press it. And again, I'm not sure if I'm going to use pins yet or not, but I'll show you in a minute. And I'll come right back and show you what it should look like after you've just taken your time and pressed the other side of the ribbon really nicely. All right, I have everything pinned, but I just want to show you really up close, if I can get my camera to really zoom in here. Come on. Come on. Well, I really wanted to show you. Okay, we've got some puckering here. Maybe you can see that fine. All right, we've got a little bit of puckering here, but this will be fine, and I'll hit it really good with the iron again. But if you can kind of tell how spread apart, gosh, sorry, if it would focus, how spread apart the scallops are here at the bottom versus how, there we go, how close they are there. So they're spread out here and close here because we're going around a curve. So I have pinned, I did go ahead and pin because we've got a pretty severe curve all the way here around the neckline. So I'm going to go ahead now and stitch this side down, and then I'm going to come back and steam the living daylights out of it just to get any puckers. Again, tailoring is a lot like sculpting. I feel like it's such a sculptable thing. This is why, exactly why you want to use Petersham ribbon and not grosgrain, because Petersham has a rigid
edge, and it will not, or grosgrain does, and it will not bend like this. It will not do a nice curve like the Petersham will. So I'm going to stitch that other side down, and then I'll stick it on the mannequin and we can take a look at it. All right. I mean, you can tell this is clearly through the wringer. Ignore all of the wrinkles. These will all eventually get pressed out, and this also doesn't fit on this mannequin. I'm wanting you to see, though, how this Petersham now curves right around this curve right here, and also, again, around the back neck. Sorry, this really doesn't fit on this mannequin well, but this is what you're kind of going for. So disregard all the wrinkles. I'm very happy with the application, though, where I needed to apply. This is also pulling on this thing. So anyway, that is what the finished trim application should look like. And at this point, go ahead and sew the side seams of your jacket body and press them open. And our next step will be to set in our sleeves into the jacket and into the lining. This looks like a hot mess at the moment, but I promise it'll look fine at the end.
All right, let's finish our pockets, and then we can, I'm actually going to attach my pockets to the body of the jacket by hand. So let's get the pockets finished, and then I will pin those onto the body of the jacket, although I was just noticing that my markings for my pockets have disappeared, which is why tailor's tags probably are the way to go. I'm just too lazy. So anyway, let's construct our pockets. So these are all three constructed the same way. You're going to take your lining piece, I'm going to do it on one of these bigger pockets, and right sides together, we're going to sew our lining piece to the top of our pocket bag, or to the top of the pocket, 5/8 of an inch here at the top. So let's do that on all three pieces real quick. Okay, before I do this, we got to leave a place for turning. So stitch about, I don't know, leave about between my fingers for turning the pocket. I forgot about that. So I'm going to stitch from the outside in about, I don't know, 2.5 inches, and then I'll stitch from about 2.5 inches to the outside on the top of all three of the pockets. All right, now it wants you to go press your seam towards your lining. So I'm just basically going to lay this all out flat and press the seam towards the lining on all three pieces, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so now we have this really weird long chain of pocket. This is the wrong side. So, and we've left our hole here at the opening, and now that's been pressed, so that'll seal up real nicely when it's time. So now we're going to take this weirdness, and basically your pocket band that's right here is going to get folded in half. So we're going to go right sides together. And there should be, right in the middle of the pocket band, you probably should, I didn't, but you should have clipped a notch that's basically halfway. But I mean, it's basically just where everything kind of matches up together. So we're going to fold these right sides together, and then we're going to sew from the top here all the way down and around to the other top to create one pocket. And you can definitely pin this. Don't press it this way because it will come back the other way. But I like to put my lining against the feed dogs. It will help ease all that in. And I am going to press this just because, or not press it, pin it, especially here at the top because it's wanting to be a little bit obstinate. And I don't want anything swishing around on me too much. So I'm just going to pin right there at the top. And then I'll let the rest all be eased in. So again, I'm going to start at the top, go all the way around, and then end here at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so you've got something that looks like this, where the pocket bag's kind of been folded down on itself. Now I'm just gonna go through and I'm going to cut my corners to reduce bulk. I'm going to trim or cut notches in around the curves so that that turns really beautifully. And then I think we turn it right side out. Yeah. Yeah, so, and you can grade your seam allowances if you'd like, if you want to trim those down, but don't forget to clip into your corners so that turns really nicely. And then we'll just go through our hole that's right here, turn it right side out, and press it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that for the other two, and I will meet you right back here. All right, so I've got the one pocket done. Now, when you are pressing, I've pulled it through, I still have this hole that's open up here. You wanna try and favor, you know, pull the lining in so that it's not peeking out on the right side. However, one of the benefits of hand sewing these to the jacket is that you can very easily manipulate that as you're hand sewing to make sure that none of the, because you don't want any of the lining, you know, popping out and peeking. So if you are gonna edge stitch and sew these on by machine to the front of your jacket, you just wanna make sure that you don't have any of your lining peeking out. So then the next step is just to slip stitch this hole closed. And I'll probably do that right before I put them onto the jacket, but that is what all 3 of your pockets should look like. One of them will be smaller, but go ahead and make 3 pockets, 2 of this size and then 1 of the smaller ones. They're all done the same way. And then we can pin them onto the jacket and sew them on. Okay, excuse the look of my sewing room and me at the moment. Okay, so I'm putting the jacket on because I've finished my pockets here, and you're gonna notice, see how you can see the lining fabric, like here on the edges? If I were just to edge stitch with a machine, I'd have to be super careful about that not peeking out. But because I'm putting mine on with a hand stitch, I'm gonna hand sew those on, I can tuck that out of the way, and that is not gonna be seen at all when these are sewn on. But at this point, you just want to try the jacket on and make sure that your pockets are level and make sure everything is level. Make sure that your shoulder seams are sitting where they're supposed to sit. I don't have the shoulder pads in this right now, which you could definitely put in if you'd want. But I'm just making sure that everything looks good and even before I hand sew these on, because I don't want to have to unpick them later. So I've got my breast pocket on my left side. You're seeing this flip-flopped because I'm looking at you in a mirror, but the left side is my breast pocket, and then my hip pockets. And again, I have these put where the pattern tells me to put it, but I don't have to put them there. I can put them pretty much wherever I want. Also, don't forget, you should have slip stitch closed where the lining and pocket band meet on the inside like I showed you. So now we're just gonna hand sew these pockets into place, and I'm gonna get real up close and show you how to do that. All right, so I'm gonna try and show you this as best as I can. But what I'm doing, I'm using a size 10 actually. I like to do those for my hand sewing. It's a size 10 sharp. Mine come from Wawak. It's the Richard Hemming & Son. Just choose a nice, good quality hand sewing needle. And I am going to thread my needle with double. So you're basically just threading your needle very carefully. And then I'm just going to, can you kind of see? Oh, you can't see that at all, can you? Basically, I'm just pulling it through, and I'm going to tie a knot so it's doubling over on itself so that we've got 2, a thickness of 2 there. And I am going to knot it at the end. I know that's a big no-no for a lot of hand sewing, but I like to live on the edge. And actually, because we're going to have lining, what I'm going to do is move all this, is I'm going to come up from the back. I'm going to come up from the back. I'm not just going to do like normal. So I'm coming up right at this corner right at this corner. I don't know if you guys can even see this. I'll get up real close and I'll show you the stitch. It's a slip stitch, which, I mean, is a very simple stitch. But basically, can you see my thread? All I'm doing is I'm going to take a bite out of this pocket, about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, and then a bite out of the bottom, out of the body of the jacket. I took too long of a piece of thread. Do as I say, not as I do. Anyway, when I'm doing this, I'm gonna grab this top layer all the way around. So that way it's kind of pulling it down and around so that we don't see any of this, or even see any of where it's kind of folded over on itself. So I'm just gonna go around. And again, it's not super anchored at those corners, so I mean, that's not really enforced, but I'm not going to be using these pockets. In fact, I'm going to just probably sew the button right through. I'm not going to do buttonholes. I'm just going to sew the button right through because these are really just decorative. But I'm just going to do that hand stitch all the way around the pocket, you know, on all 3 sides. I'm not going to shut the top closed. I'm going to keep that open. But sew it all the way around, all 3 sides on all 3 pockets. And then someone said it's easier to see things when it's on the mannequin. So I will sew all 3 pockets on and then show you what it looks like on the mannequin. Okay, I have clearly not sewn all the pockets on. I just wanted to show you the difference here really quickly. So this one here, now this is on my mannequin, kind of wonky, and my mannequin also, this doesn't fit my mannequin because my mannequin's smaller than I am. But look at that. So I have hand sewn this one on. And notice just how nicely it just kind of melds into the fabric. That's just all that hand sewing. Like, it almost blends right in. Again, you wouldn't want to hang your hands in this pocket because it's not, you know, it's not been stabilized really well, which you could do with some hand stitches, I guess. But I'm just going to close that with a button, right like so, and call it good. And I'm not going to use these pockets. They're really just there for show. Whereas, because this pocket looked the same, you can't see any of that lime green peeking out. I mean, it really just looks like, it's part of the coat. Whereas with edge stitching, you can see where you see that little bit. I mean, this is just pinned on, it's not edge stitched, but still, even edge stitching close, you'd still be able to catch a little bit of that lime green kind of peeking out. So again, by hand stitching, it's just gonna meld right in, just like this pocket. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and hand sew this pocket on and the breast pocket, and then we're gonna set in some sleeves. All right, so we have our sleeves that we have constructed here. And we're going to, now the bodied sleeves just take a little bit more to set in because we're gonna steam some shape in there. Whereas I'll just shove the other sleeves into the lining. Pretty like normal, but I mean, I'll show you how I do all that. Okay, when we sewed this, if you'll recall, we sewed in 2 lines of ease stitches, basting stitches. What we're gonna do, there's 2 ways that you can kind of set this up. I have my ham leaned against my seam roll just to kind of prop it up. And I also have one of these. This is a pressing board that I bought at a Claire Schaefer class, and I'm sorry I don't have a link for it. I think she just sells them in her class, which actually Claire is retired, but the 2 gals that have taken over teaching her classes now, they still do sell them, but I think they only sell them in class. But this is meant for the French jacket and steaming specifically sleeve caps and steaming that shape in. But you know, you can use your ham just as easily and just prop it up here on your seam roll to kind of make it stand up. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab the tails of my sleeve, and I'm sure if you guys have been doing any sewing at all, you know how to ease a sleeve cap. But what we're doing is we're just gonna steam some shape in before we even start setting it into the jacket. And I kind of I've got a trick for actually setting it into the jacket as well. All right, so I'm just pulling on my basting stitches so that it starts to look like a shaped sleeve. Now again, it doesn't really matter the size. We're just gonna pulling these so we can, and we're not really gathering, we're just easing. So you don't want any pinches there, but we're just going to ease this and steam it so that when we do go to set it into the jacket, it just sets in much more beautiful. I mean, look at that. The way this is a little too much. We've gathered that there. So we're gonna just kind of ease it back a little. But, yeah, just kind of move your little gathers around. You don't want any of the gathering on the sleeve side, but again, this is wool. It will mold. So once you kind of have pulled that nicely, we're going to dress it on top of our ham. So the bottom part of the sleeve is just under here. This is just really the top of the sleeve. And we're going to kind of pull those gathers, or those ease stitches. And you can take even some, I recommend glass-headed pens, not plastic ones, just in case you don't want to accidentally melt anything. But you can kind of, oops, see, I've got some pinching there. You can kind of pin those in place just so it doesn't fall. But I have this at the edge of my table so the sleeve can just kind of hang down. But then I'm just going to take my steam, and I'm not touching the sleeve. I'm just steaming the living daylights, trying not to steam my hand or the lens. Trying to steam that shape in. All right, and then we're just gonna let this sit for a long time. Let it dry completely. So now I'm gonna do the other sleeve. All right, and now we're just gonna let those dry, and while those are getting nice and cool, we will set in the sleeves to our lining. All right, so we have our lining completely constructed. We've got the front bands on there, everything but the sleeves, but our sleeves are also constructed. So we're just gonna set these in real quick. While the body of our regular part of our sleeves, also excuse my outfit, I'm doing laundry. We were gone for Thanksgiving and I have no clothes to wear at the moment. That's not true, but I'm out of underwear. Okay, so I'm going to turn my sleeves right side out. We're going to set our sleeves into the lining. Now, the beauty of lining sleeves is that if you get some pinches in the top of your sleeve, of your lining, it's okay. No one sees it because it's inside your coat. Even when you're taking it on and off, no one sees it. So it's very forgiving. So this is a very easy step for anyone that's scared of setting in those sleeves. All right, I'm gonna turn my jacket shell wrong side out. So there you can see all of my ugly innards. And I'm going to take my sleeve that is right side out and put it into this armhole and match it right sides together. And you want to make sure that your notches, that you have the correct sleeve in. So make sure that the single notch is in front, which this one is. So I'm just going to take my armhole. This is right side out. It's going to go inside the armhole. Just like so. So then the sleeve and the armhole are right sides together. So I sew with very few pins, even when I am doing, I'm gonna set this sleeve aside so it doesn't get caught up in everything. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to match, because it's a 2-piece sleeve, there is a mark underneath your sleeve where you should have marked where it's a box on the pattern, like a square, but that is the side seam. So I'm gonna match that notch up with my side seam. And then I'm going to match my notches. So my front notch gets, and again, this is all right sides together. It's my front notches and my back notches. Now at the bottom part of the sleeve here, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, so there's no easing at all through the bottom part of the sleeve. It should all fit 1-to-1. The easing all comes in the top of the sleeve. So then I'm gonna go to the top of the sleeve and match my top notch with my shoulder seam. And that's gonna be it for pins. Now, you're gonna notice how much excess, see how much excess is there? I'm going to sew this with the sleeve against the feed dogs. However, I'm not using, if you have a regular at-home machine and the long arm comes out, so you can pull the little piece out and then it's, the part that the machine sews on is nice and skinny, don't sew your sleeve around that. That is going to pull and distort pretty badly. So this, and again, I can't even do that on this machine, but it still can be done. So what you're gonna do is my sleeve is inside there. I've got right sides together. I'm just gonna take this and flip this out just a little bit. So I'm basically flipping the sleeve kind of to the outside, like kind of back on itself. And that is how I'm going to sew. So I'm gonna start at the underarm seam, and it seems a little counterintuitive, I will agree. We have 5/8 of an inch. And again, here at the bottom of the sleeve, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, so I'm not doing any easing. But just like, so I'm just gonna sew like normal. All right, once I have passed my notches, right there, now I'm gonna notice that I've got a lot of excess, and I'm gonna do just like I did when I was sewing the curves in on the band. I'm gonna put my hand underneath everything here, and I'm gonna grab that sleeve and pull it back. And just go really slowly, staying with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And again, just do a little by little. It's not a race. Oh, wait. No, wait. Hold on. Oh, no. We're still good. If you have to stop and reorient yourself, that's okay. Okay. When you do it this way, it does get confusing the way you're going in a circle a little bit, so just go slow. And again, I'm just pulling the sleeve back. Now I'm at the top. So now I'm gonna pull more of this around, pull that sleeve back as I sew. And we're not super concerned if we get some pinches, we get some pinches. And there we go. Okay, I got a pinch. And you know what? I'm not gonna fix it. Because again, this is using the same, well, it's not. The upper sleeve's actually different, but it's the same amount of ease. They have not done anything different. And the top of the upper sleeve on this pattern is meant to have a lot of ease in it so that you can sculpt it with the wool or whatever weave that you're using to give it that nice shape for the shoulder pad and for the, what we're gonna put a sleeve head in, which makes it really hard to ease that much into when you've got something tightly woven like a lining fabric, which is a much tighter weave of fabric. So it is hard. Sometimes I've even known professionals that purposely just put a pleat in the top of the sleeve. Same thing, but you know what? And actually, mine's at the top of the sleeve. So look, I've got a pleat right there. Gonna leave it. Everything else is sewn in. As long as your sleeve is sewn in the right sleeve in the right hole, you're not gonna notice a difference there. So there we have it. I'll get that all turned right side there. So we've got one sleeve sewn in. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then our lining is gonna be ready to go into our coat as soon as it's ready. Okay, so I've got a couple of smaller pleats on this one. Again, I'm not even gonna worry about it. If it does bother you, just unpick about an inch. Depends on how bad of a pleat it is. Just unpick a little bit on either side, and then you don't have to unpick the whole thing. Just unpick on either side of the pleat, and then you can try easing it back in. Or you could also put in the gathering stitches like we did on the main body of the jacket and ease it in that way if that gets you. But you know what? For those of you that aren't perfectionists like myself, this works. Again, no one is ever going to see that, and it will not change the fit or feel of the jacket at all. Okay, so our lining is all ready to be put into the coat. Now we're going to set in the sleeves into our jacket, put in our shoulder pads and our sleeve heads, and then that'll be it for today. And then next week we will attach lining to coat and finish up. Alrighty. All right, guys, I have window installers here, so it might get noisy. I'm not sure how long we're gonna have here, but I'm going to, we should have, our lining is all done. The sleeves are inserted and everything, and now we're going to insert the sleeves that we pressed real nicely. Look at that. Look at that. Where we steamed our sleeves, the tops of our sleeves real well. We're gonna insert those and then insert the sleeve heads. I'm gonna show you how to do that because that is not included in the pattern. And then put in the shoulder pads, and then we'll be done for today and ready to attach lining to jacket next week. All right, so first things first. I mean, if you've inserted a sleeve before, this is not, you know, rocket science. We basically have a vest right now with this jacket. You're gonna wanna make sure, I like to turn my jacket body inside out. So I've got it inside out, and then my sleeve is right side out. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you've got the correct sleeve. Oh, and I grabbed the right one. That very rarely happens. Okay, so we're gonna have, you're gonna put your sleeve in, right sides together. Be careful not to crush all that nice pressing that you did in there. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna first go through and I'm gonna match all my notches. So there should be, there was like a box on the pattern that marks the side seam. So I'm gonna match that up with the side seam, and I'm gonna pop a pin, set that sleeve over there. I'm gonna pop a pin there. And then I'm gonna pop a pin at the top where I marked the top of my sleeve, which is somewhere. Sometimes you have to go searching for those notches. There it is. And that's gonna go at the shoulder. So I'm just gonna pop a pin in there. So far this should all look pretty normal. And then I'm gonna match my notches. So my single notch, so again here at the under part of the sleeve, from notch to notch here at the underarm, you have a 1-to-1 ratio. So you're not doing any easing whatsoever between there. However, aside from those notches, you're going to get your basting stitches out of the way too, because we'll pull that ease stitching out here soon. The rest of the sleeve I'm going to show you. Okay, so we have the sleeve very roughly set in. Now, of course, you've got a ton of ease with the top of the sleeve cap. Now, what I like to do, and I learned this trick from Linda Lee, who is the sewing workshop guru. If you've not taken any of her blueprint classes, you should. She is an amazing, amazing teacher. I've learned so much from her. But you're going to take, and you are going to, so this is the jacket and this is the sleeve side. And I'm just gonna go like halfway in between these two pins. So this is the top of my sleeve and this is the back notch, doesn't matter which one. And about midway between those, I'm just gonna kind of, and your sleeve actually should fit pretty good because you put all that ease in. But you're gonna take it and you're gonna wrap it around your finger like so. And then pop a pin in. And then just keep dividing the distance between pins. So now we're between the notch and that new pin, and then up here, just keep dividing that distance and popping a pin. And what this does is by pulling the sleeve up over your finger and wrapping it around your finger to put the pin, that is building the ease in. Again, you have steamed a lot of the ease in already. So this really isn't as hard as one would think. But this is where I do actually use a lot of pins because, again, it's like sculpting. I'm also falling out of my chair. I'm leaning forward too far. It's like sculpting. And I'll sew these in with the sleeve on top, not like I did the other one. So this is where I don't use Janet Prey's stuff. This is where I go rogue. But that's the nice thing. You take enough classes and enough lessons from people and you can kind of pick and choose the techniques that work best for you or that might work better for different situations. So I'm just going around the sleeve, wrapping it over my finger like that. So the sleeve is on the top of my finger and popping a pin in. Okay, and then once I feel like I'm pretty good, I'm just gonna sew it in, and again, I'm working with the sleeve on top and the body of the jacket on the bottom this time, just so I can make sure I'm not catching any pinches, because I do not want any pinches for this one. So I'm sewing this in at 5/8 of an inch, so I'm gonna go ahead and sew that sleeve in real quick. All right, now you'll notice I sewed over my pins, and I do that when I'm doing something like a sleeve. But guys, I literally, so much ease was in the sleeve cap, and because we pressed or steamed it really well over our ham earlier, and because we did the whole finger wrap with the pin, I had no issues at all setting this in. And again, I just very carefully go slow, and I do sew over my pins for this. But we're gonna take a real quick look at the right side. Oops, throwing pins. And you're gonna see how beautiful it looks, and we don't even have a sleeve head or sleeve or shoulder pad in yet, but look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Just a beautiful sleeve. And again, we're gonna put in the sleeve head and the shoulder pad, and it's just gonna make that look beautiful. All right, so our next step is go ahead and pull your basting stitches out now that we're in on your sleeve, and then we're gonna do some trimming. All right, once you have your your easing stitches, not basting, they're easing stitches, pulled out, we're gonna go back into your armhole here, and I am just going to trim between the notches, maybe just a hair up. I'm gonna just basically trim that seam allowance in half, but just between the notches. I don't wanna go too far up. That just gives a little bit better movement. So I'm just trimming that like in half of its width, So it basically Just looks like that, you know, I've just cut down and then trimmed that out. Okay, so I'm going to really quickly set in the other sleeve. There's our sleeve hole. Set in the other sleeve, and then I'll come back and show you how to do sleeve heads and the shoulder pads. All right, now we're ready for sleeve heads. Now, I had left a link in the very first video of where I get my sleeve heads, and basically these are just like a polyester lamb's wool or a fleecy kind of side, and then it has kind of a foamy side on the other just to give it some sponge, but you could use flannel, you could use lamb's wool, whatever. But I do have a link to where I bought that. And if you want to make your own, it's literally just a strip, like 2 inches by, this one's probably 12 inches. You don't need anything this long. I end up cutting a lot of this off because this could be used for a man's jacket, women's jacket, whatever. So they come long. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, the wrong side is kind of the foamy side. If yours is the same on both sides, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to fold over one long edge by about 1/2 inch, 5/8, 1/2 inch. And I'm just going to sew it down. I'm just going to sew close to that raw edge, just because we want that double thickness right there at that. So I'm going to do that real quick on both sleeve heads. All right, so now this is what your sleeve head, you know, on one side, you know, it's been folded over on itself, and on the other side, you just have, and it's fine that it's dark thread, you're not going to see it. So we've got 2 of these strips, and I'm going to show you now how to set them into the sleeve. Okay, so I've got my jacket here. I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit on this one. There we go. All right, I've got my jacket, and I'm going to turn it inside out. Both my sleeves have been set in. So we're just going to start with one sleeve hole, and I still have the sleeve in there. It just makes it easier to sew, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to take this sleeve head, and I'm going to mark the middle, just with a pin. And now we want to butt this folded edge right up, oops, hold on, I still have a little bit of a basting stitch left. I want to butt this folded edge right up to the stitching line of the sleeve, and I'm going to start at the top of the sleeve, and you're going to pin it, the folded edge, I've just hooked myself, just the middle of that, and I'm, again, lining up the folded edge to the stitching line. I'm doing that backwards. Hold on. No, that's right. Yes. Okay. Sorry, I had to think about this. And this is going to extend past, but that's okay because your sleeve will come out and that will just be along the top of the sleeve eventually. Okay. Sorry, sometimes you have to, it gets kind of topsy-turvy and backwards when you're doing shoulder pads because those look like they're put in wrong when they're not, just because you have everything inside out. All right, now that I have the top there, I'm just gonna follow this along and pin this in, and again, I want that folded edge butted up to my stitching line. And we really just need this. I'm just kind of putting some pins in here. We're gonna hand sew this in with a long running stitch. You don't wanna go too much. You definitely don't wanna go past your notches, but I don't even take it that far. I'm just gonna go in the front. Is this the front? I'm just gonna go kind of right past this seam. So again, I'm not going all the way to the notch. And again, you're gonna hand stitch this in so it's not, you know. And then I'm just going to cut off some of the excess. So I'm losing like that much on that side. Then I'll show you what this looks like. So again, we're just that folded edge up to the stitching line. And I'm gonna cut right before that seam. So I'm losing like that much on the other side. So when all is said and done, it looks kind of weird. It's gonna look kind of like that. So, you know, there's the inside. I have it all pinned. So my folded edge that I folded and sewed is butted up to the seam allowance. So the seam allowance is, you know, right there over the sleeve head. So I'm just gonna go in with a needle and thread with double thread, and I'm gonna do a very loose running stitch all the way around. So all I'm gonna do, again, I've got this pinned, I'm just sewing through the seam allowance. And it's just really a stab stitch. I mean, it can be, you want it kind of loose because you want it to be able to move. But again, you want it nice and long. So I'm gonna get it as close to that seam line as I can, but I'm just sewing through, the seam allowance. I'm not sewing into the body of the sleeve or the jacket at all. There we go. Get a little bit of a rocking stitch going, makes it go a little quicker. But I will show this to you. Let me do this. So literally it's just an in and out stitch. There's nothing special about it. If you've done any kind of hand stitching, and they are really wide. So as you can see, they're really wide. Can you see those? They're really wide stitches. They're like, I don't know, 1/2 inch long, 3/4 of an inch long, but that's fine. We just want it tacked into place, basically. So don't pull your thread too, you know, tight. You don't want any dimpling. You just want it to stay in place and pad out that sleeve head like it's supposed to do. Okay, so I've got it all just very loosey-goosey hand sewn in there. So that's kind of what it looks like. And then if I pull the sleeve wrong side out, you'll see it looks like that. So there's the sleeve, and then this goes kind of on top of that. So when the sleeve is right side out, it's going to support, can we see that? Look how well it supports that sleeve. It just has a nice floofy, I don't know if you can see that. It's a beautiful sleeve head. Beautiful cap of the sleeve there. All right. So I'm gonna do this to the other side, and then we're gonna put in our shoulder pads. So I'm gonna go do that real quick on the other side, and then we'll put in our shoulder pads. Okay, I've got sleeve heads set in both sleeves, and now it is time for me to knock everything over. It is time for shoulder pads. All right, your shoulder pads will come in a set because they are opposite. Now, you know shoulder pads, they have a curve to them, right? So this technically goes on top of your shoulder. Is that right? Nope. No, that was right. Like that. Like that. So you want the wide poofy set to be at the seam allowance, and then when it goes to nothing, needs to be up by your neck. If your shoulder pad is too big for this part of your body, you're wanting to trim it at the neck where it's super thin anyway. There's usually quite a bit of thinness here that you can get away with trimming. And I have to do that a lot. And a lot of times they will come, there's a little notch there in the center. That's the center of your shoulder pad. Again, they come in sets because they're not identical. If you look at this, you can see that this, if you fold it in half, again, there's that notch. So let's fold it at the notch. And you can see that they're not created equal, right? This longer part here goes to the back. The shorter one goes to the front. So sometimes it takes a little bit of figuring out, because when we insert these, because we're gonna have our coat. Oh, I also wanted to make a note. With my sleeve heads, I stopped my sleeve heads right at the seam for where the under sleeve connects to the upper sleeve. So that's where I ended up cutting off just a little bit more. So I go from seam line to seam line. So I really just have the sleeve head in against the upper sleeve, just as a side note. All right, so again, I have to look at these sometimes. That is the back. Okay, so here we have our jacket. This is my neck edge here. And then this is the sleeve end, obviously. This is the back of the jacket is facing you, front of the jacket is facing me. But we're gonna put these in and it's gonna be like an upside down, like a bird. And so you're going to line up your end of your seam allowance, or your shoulder pad, actually with the end of the seam allowance. So it's gonna extend just a wee bit past your shoulder. That's what you want. But then you wanna make sure, so I've got that notch lined up at the shoulder seam, right at the seam allowance, like this weird bird. But you see, this is almost completely to the seam allowance here. So I need to trim that back, probably a good 5/8 of an inch, just so it doesn't get in that seam allowance when I'm sewing the lining to the jacket. So, and this, I have narrow shoulders, so that's pretty common. So I'm just gonna trim, oh, that's notched too. The back is notched on that. Yeah. So I'm gonna trim just, you know, starting here and trim down to about 5/8 and then trim back to nothing. Again, this is very thin through here, so I'm not worried about trimming away anything necessary. So I'm gonna do that really quickly, and I'm gonna do it to both shoulder pads at the same time so that they, or do it to one and then do it to the other so that they match. This is just a little trick. I'm flipping it over, matching up notches and stuff. Then it makes it really easy to trim the same amount off the other shoulder pad. Okay, so I've trimmed that off. Okay, so again, this looking like a bird, we are going to pin, there we go. So that's nice and out of that seam allowance now. So I'm going to take, and it's gonna be counterintuitive, and I'm gonna force it, and I'm going to, again, line up the raw edge of my seam allowance with the raw edge of this, the poofier part of the shoulder pad. And I'm gonna do a similar thing that I did with the sleeve head, and I'm gonna just do a running stitch, but make sure you're only sewing through the seam allowance. Don't sew through the sleeve head and the shoulder pad at the same time, which, you know, you just have to kind of get your fingers in there and make sure you're not doing that. So you can definitely pin this in first. Again, you want your shoulder pad to look like a bird. It's gonna shoot up like that. And you just wanna pin it in a couple spots. You wanna keep these really long running stitches as well, because you want the shoulder pad to be able to bend and not pucker your top of your sleeve. That is not what you want. So you wanna have plenty of movement in your stitches. So I'm gonna really quickly, again, sew down this shoulder pad just to the seam allowance. And again, my shoulder pad is matched up to the raw edge of that, you know, sleeve seam allowance. So I'm going to do a real long running stitch through there. I'm going to use double thread just because that's what I like to do. Now this gets pretty thick, especially when you get into the meat and potato part of the shoulder pad. So you a lot of times have to go kind of less running stitch and more of like a stab stitch because it's harder to get your needle through all the layers, especially if you're using a small one like I am. But again, nice and long stitches. Makes it super quick. Okay, and then we're just gonna tie that off. All right, and then next we're going to tack it down here at the shoulder seam. And what I do is I just do a couple of tacking stitches on either side, just through the seam allowance. So I just do a couple of back stitches through the shoulder pad into the shoulder seam allowance. This just keeps it from like flapping around. And then do it on the other side of the seam allowance, or on the other seam allowance. This is just to keep it in place. And then just tie it off. Doesn't have to be pretty. All right, so there we go. Now, when this is all right side out, you are going to have a beautifully supported sleeve. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? All right, so I am going to do the other side and then we'll put it on the mannequin and then we'll be done for today. And yeah, just waiting to finish up next week. So I'm gonna do the other side and then we'll meet back at the mannequin and I'll show you what everything looks like all put together. All right, so this is where we should be. Now you're gonna notice that my jacket looks horribly wrinkly and like there's a lot. This does not fit my dress form. My dress form's smaller than I am. But once you have your sleeves in, I'm very pleased. I just put it on and I'm very pleased with how it's fitting. I mean, my sleeves, this is just looking so much better than everything I've seen so far. But you can go and hit this with steam. Do not touch this with your iron. You don't want to crush any of that structure that you've built in, but you can hit this with steam if you'd like. And again, it's puckering where it shouldn't. Okay, so you should have your pockets on. It's also on my dress form wonky because my pockets are also not wonky. But you should have your pockets on. I went ahead and put the buttons on my pockets because I sewed my buttons all the way through the coat. So those pockets are sewn closed just because I like the way that looks best. And then your lining is all constructed. You've got your sleeves set in, everything ready. So then when we come back next week, we're going to put our lining into our jacket. So some buttonholes and buttons and then be finished. Do a final press and be good to go. So yeah, we are making headway, guys. See you next week.